Behind every golden gate lies a darkness no one dares to speak of. The sun was setting over Lagos, its fading glow bouncing off the polished glass windows of the sprawling Adebayo mansion in Ikoyi. From a distance it looked less like a home, and more like a palace carved out of ambition, pride, and ruthless power. The gates stood tall, crafted with golden bars imported from Italy, their shine a constant reminder that Chief Alade Adebayo was not just a man, but an empire walking in flesh. Every curve of the mansion reflected wealth, Italian marble that cooled the hallways like frozen rivers, chandeliers imported from Dubai that scattered light, like diamonds across the living room, and fountains that never ceased to whisper wealth into the night air. The air smelled not of flowers, but of dominance, the kind of dominance that built empires and destroyed rivals. Chief Alade Adebayo had lived his life like a lion among men, feared by competitors, admired by politicians, envied by friends, and sometimes even hated by his own blood. His empire stretched across oil rigs deep in the Niger Delta, luxury estates across Victoria Island, and silent stakes in government projects that made him untouchable. But as powerful as he was in life, his death arrived silently, reminding everyone that no empire, no matter how fortified, could outlive mortality. His death shook Lagos like thunder. Newspapers screamed headlines: Billionaire mogul, Chief Alade Adebayo, dies at 68. Radios buzzed with speculation, while television anchors discussed the future of his empire in hushed yet eager tones. But inside the mansion, grief and fear mingled like smoke. For while the rest of the city mourned his passing, the family behind those golden gates feared one question more than all: who would inherit the empire? Kunle, the eldest son, wore his grief like armor. He moved about the house with chest raised, shoulders squared, barking orders at staff as if the empire was already his. In his heart, he believed that his position as the firstborn gave him automatic rights to everything: oil companies, estates, bank accounts, even the respect of the boardroom. His eyes carried a fire, not of sorrow, but of entitlement. Our father is gone, but his empire remains, he muttered more than once, loud enough for all to hear. Folake, the second-born and only daughter, was a storm wrapped in elegance. Draped in black lace, she moved quietly through the mourners, her lips pressed tight, her gaze calculating. Folake had always been close to her father in ways Kunle never understood. She remembered evenings when Chief Alade would ask her opinion on business matters, her keen mind winning his nod of approval. Somewhere deep in her heart, she carried a suspicion, an intuition, that her father had not placed his empire in Kunle's hands alone. Something about the way the chief had always spoken in riddles, about true leadership and vision beyond greed, gnawed at her. The family compound overflowed with people during the funeral rites. Yoruba elders gathered at the entrance, their agbadas flowing as they exchanged proverbs and offered solemn prayers. Drummers beat the talking drum in rhythms that carried both grief and grandeur, announcing to the world that a giant had fallen. Women served steaming plates of amala and ewedu, while trays of jollof rice glistened with fried plantain on the side. Guests wept openly, their wails rising like a chorus, while others spoke in low tones of Chief Alade's rumored hidden fortunes, offshore accounts in London, undeclared properties in Dubai, whispers of a secret heir outside Lagos. Madame Merenike, the widow, sat at the center of it all like a broken queen. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her voice too weak to respond to endless condolences. She had lived in the shadows of her husband's empire, enduring his absences, his rumored affairs, his unpredictable temper, and yet she had loved him in her own quiet way. Now, with him gone, she feared not the emptiness of her bed, but the storm brewing among her children. As night fell, the house grew quieter, but the air thickened with suspicion. Whispers floated in corners, servants exchanged nervous glances, and the tension between Kunle and Folake became almost visible. Ayomide, the youngest child, watched everything with wide, innocent eyes. Still in university, she was seen by her siblings as the baby of the family, too naive to understand the politics of wealth. But Ayomide's silence was not ignorance, it was observation. She noticed the way Folake clenched her jaw whenever Kunle spoke, the way Kunle tightened his fists whenever their mother questioned him. She noticed, too, the unease in the servants' movements, as though they feared what was to come more than what had already happened. Later that night, when the guests had left and the drummer's beats faded into silence, the mansion felt different. The corridors were heavy with echoes of Chief Alade's presence. His study, once forbidden to everyone except him, now stood like a shrine. Papers, files, and photographs lay scattered, as if the chief himself had departed in haste. It was here, during the mourning period, that Ayomide wandered aimlessly, her steps carrying her into the heart of her father's secrets. She opened a drawer absent-mindedly, her fingers brushing against old fountain pens, faded receipts, and forgotten scraps of paper. Then her hand struck something hard, something unfamiliar. Pulling it out, she froze. In her palm lay an old dust-covered Nokia 3310. Its once blue cover had faded to gray, and its screen bore the scratches of time. The phone looked ordinary, almost laughable in a house where every child carried the latest iPhones and Samsungs. But to Ayomide, it felt different. Why would a man like Chief Alade, who replaced cars every year and imported the latest gadgets, keep such a relic hidden in his drawer? The phone was off, its battery likely dead for years. Yet as Ayomide held it, her heart began to race. She could almost hear her father's voice in her head, calm yet cryptic, warning her not to underestimate the smallest things. She glanced over her shoulder nervously, half expecting Kunle or Folake to appear. But the room was empty. Her fingers trembled as she slipped the phone into her pocket, its weight heavier than it should have been. She didn't know why, but something told her this was not just an old phone. It was a key, one that could unlock the very truth her family feared. As she stepped out of the study, the dim light caught the dust rising from the forgotten Nokia 3310, and in that moment, Ayomide knew. This relic from the past would either rebuild or destroy the Adebayo Empire. Sometimes, the loudest secrets are whispered in silence. Ayomide shut her bedroom door quietly that night, her hands trembling as though she had stolen something forbidden. And in truth, she had. Hidden deep inside her pocket, away from the prying eyes of her siblings, was the old Nokia 3310, the relic her father had left behind. She pulled it out cautiously, her heart thudding as though the phone itself carried a pulse. For a moment, she simply stared at it. Its weight seemed heavier than its size allowed, as if every secret Chief Alade had hidden during his lifetime had been compressed into this tiny object. She rummaged through her drawers until she found an old universal charger she hadn't touched in years. Her iPhone cords were useless for something so outdated. Her fingers shook as she connected it, plugging the phone into the socket. NEPA, as usual, had struck earlier in the evening, leaving the mansion in darkness, but the estate's generator rumbled outside, flooding the house with artificial light. The phone lay still for a few seconds, dead like the man who once owned it. Then, without warning, its screen flickered. The faint glow pierced through the shadows of her room like a whisper of life returning from the grave. The tiny green screen lit up, weak but determined, and the iconic Nokia tune stuttered out, broken yet haunting. Ayomide's breath caught in her throat. It was as though her father's spirit had reached back into the world, not to comfort, but to reveal something hidden. She leaned closer, her pulse racing as the phone displayed a single word, "Welcome." The battery indicator showed just one bar. She knew time was short. Navigating the phone felt like stepping back in time. She scrolled through menus that seemed archaic compared to her sleek iPhone. But what stunned her most was the voicemail folder. It was full. Her father, a man who had preferred secrecy to openness, had stored his last words in a device no one would think to check. She pressed play. The first message was static-filled, her father's deep baritone crackling through. "If you are hearing this, then the world has already taken me. Trust nothing, not even the lawyer. You will see." Ayomide froze. Lawyer? Which lawyer? Their father's death had been followed almost immediately by the will reading, a brief session where Chief's longtime legal advisor, Barrister Tunde, declared Kunle the rightful heir to nearly everything. Could it be that the will had been tampered with? Her heart pounded as she played the next recording. Chief Alade's voice came again, weaker this time, almost trembling. "There are things my children do not know, things that cannot be spoken in open air. I have placed the truth where only the courageous can find it." The line went dead. Ayomide's palms grew clammy. Her father, who had always appeared invincible, had recorded these in his final days, sounding fragile, almost fearful. What had he been hiding? Why leave such cryptic clues on an old mobile phone, rather than in official documents? Her door creaked suddenly, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. Folake's shadow appeared in the hallway. "Ayomide!" Folake's voice carried suspicion wrapped in sisterly authority. "What are you doing awake at this time?" I was just reading," Ayomide stammered, quickly sliding the Nokia under her pillow. Folake's eyes narrowed. She lingered at the doorway, her silhouette rigid. "Be careful. These are dangerous days. People are watching everything." And with that, she walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor like tiny hammers. Ayomide exhaled shakily. She hadn't realized she had been holding her breath. She knew she couldn't let anyone, especially Folake or Kunle, see the phone. Whatever secrets it carried, they could either protect her family or destroy it. The next morning, Kunle stormed through the dining hall, his voice booming. "From today, every movement in this house will be monitored. No more secrecy. We cannot afford traitors among us." His words weren't aimed at anyone in particular, but Ayomide felt his eyes on her longer than necessary. At breakfast, as steaming plates of akara and pap were served, she kept her head low. Folake barely touched her food, her sharp eyes scanning everyone like a hawk. Madame Morenike sat silently at the table's head, her grief drowning out everything else. She barely noticed her children's silent war. Later, when Ayomide returned to her room, she powered the phone again. More messages revealed themselves. A text message read, "Trust is fragile. Even those closest to you may already be bought." Another, "Do not believe the will presented to you." It was rewritten. Her heart thudded violently. Could it be true? That their father's official lawyer, Barrister Tunde, the man who had served him loyally for decades, had accepted a bribe to tilt the empire into Kunle's hands. It explained too much. The rushed reading of the will, the vague language, the smug look on Kunle's face, even before the documents were opened. Then came the last saved message, and this one shook her to her bones. It wasn't a voicemail. It was a note saved in the drafts folder. When she opened it, she found a set of coordinates, typed clumsily as though with shaking hands. Beneath them, her father had written only one line. "For the true heir, the truth awaits in Ibadan." Ayomide gasped, clutching the phone tightly as if it might vanish. Ibadan? Why Ibadan? Their family had no official ties there, or so she thought. Before she could process further, footsteps approached. Panicking, she shoved the phone into her school bag, zipping it up tightly. Folake entered without knocking, her eyes scanning the room like a detective. "You've been acting strange," she said, her voice cold. "If you know something, Ayomide, you had better speak now. Don't let Kunle find out before I do." Ayomide swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I don't know what you're talking about." Folake stared at her for a long, suffocating moment, then finally turned and left, her lace wrapper swaying behind her. But her suspicion was clear. Ayomide knew she was running out of time. That night, as the mansion descended into uneasy silence once more, Ayomide lay awake, clutching her school bag like a lifeline. The whispers of her father's voice still echoed in her ears. Trust nothing. The lawyer cannot be believed. The truth waits in Ibadan. As the old phone screen dimmed one last time, Ayomide stared at the coordinates flashing faintly, realizing her father had left behind not just wealth, but a trail that could unravel the entire empire. The shadows were speaking, and she had no choice but to listen. When inheritance is at stake, blood ties turn into battlegrounds. The days after Chief Alade Adebayo's burial were far from peaceful. Though the drummers had stopped and the guests had gone, the mansion no longer felt like a home. It had become a battlefield, and the war was no longer with outsiders, but within the very bloodline of the Adebayo family. Kunle rose every morning with the arrogance of a man already crowned. He barked orders at the staff, reminding them constantly that he was now the head of the household. The drivers were instructed not to hand car keys to anyone without his approval. Security guards were told to report directly to him, bypassing Madame Merenik. He walked through the corridors in expensive caftans, his chest puffed out, his voice deep, intimidating. To him, the empire was already his. The formalities were just distractions. Folake, however, was not one to bow. She confronted Kunle at the dining hall one humid evening, her eyes sharp with fire. "Kunle, do you think we are blind? Do you think we didn't see how fast the will was read? Or how Tunde smirked like a man who had already been bought?" Kunle slammed his fist against the table, making the plates rattle. "Careful, Folake. You dare to accuse me in front of Mother?" Madame Mereniki raised her weary eyes, tears silently brimming. She had sat through too many of these arguments torn between her children. The lines on her face deepened as she whispered, "Enough. Your father's body is barely cold, but Folake would not relent. Mother, can't you see? This is not about grief anymore. Kunle bribed Tunde. Our father's will, whatever the real one was twisted into this farce." The servants, standing quietly in the corners, exchanged nervous glances. They had been whispering among themselves since the funeral. Some swore they had seen Chief Alade meeting a strange man in the garden days before his death, his voice low, his face tense. Others claimed to have seen papers exchanged. Rumors grew like wildfire. Was the chief planning something his family had never known? In the midst of this tension, Baba Fatai, Chief's elder brother from the village, arrived in his flowing white agbada, his walking stick tapping against the marble floor. His voice boomed with authority. "This talk of lawyers and papers is foreign nonsense. In our tradition, it is the elders who decide who inherits the throne of a man. Bloodline is not measured by ink, but by custom." Kunle bowed slightly in respect, but smirked inwardly. "Uncle, with all due respect, times have changed. We live in Lagos now, not in the village. The law recognizes written wills, not proverbs." Baba Fatai's eyes blazed. "And what law gave you the right to seize the keys to your father's cars? To silence your mother's voice? You call yourself heir, but your father was not a fool. He saw deeper than your arrogance." The words cut Kunle, but his pride shielded him. He turned away dismissively, barking at the staff to bring drinks. But even as he tried to show strength, Folake's words gnawed at him. She was not bluffing. She suspected more than he realized. Later that night, tension grew thicker. A staff member, Musa, was caught sneaking out of the study with folded papers hidden under his shirt. Kunle pounced on him like a lion. "What are you carrying?" he demanded, his voice echoing. The papers, when unrolled, were drafts of property documents. Not the will, but something related to the chief's offshore accounts. Folake's eyes widened as she stared at them. "So it's true," she whispered. "Father was planning something beyond all of us." Kunle shoved Musa against the wall. "Who sent you?" he roared, his anger raw and unfiltered. Musa trembled, his eyes darting between Kunle and Folake. Finally he stammered, I only wanted to protect myself. I overheard the chief before he died. He spoke of Ibadan. The word fell heavy into the silence of the room. Folake's gaze flickered, for she had heard Ayomide mutter the same city name in her sleep 2 nights ago. Her suspicion sharpened. That night, while Kunle stormed through the house, raging and issuing threats, Folake quietly entered Ayomide's room. Her younger sister was curled up in bed, pretending to sleep. Folake scanned the room. Carefully, her eyes caught on the school bag tucked too tightly under Ayomide's pillow. Her lips curled into a knowing smile. She knelt beside her sister, brushing her hair gently. "Ayomide," she whispered, her voice carrying both tenderness and steel. "What are you hiding from us?" Ayomide's breath caught, her heart pounding as though the secret in her bag had leapt into her chest. She dared not answer. Folake's fingers reached slowly for the bag, her suspicion fully ignited, while Ayomide lay frozen, realizing her secret was moments away from being exposed. The smallest voice sometimes carries the heaviest truth. Ayomide had never felt the weight of her father's shadow more than on the night she decided to leave the mansion. The walls of the house had grown suffocating, Kunle's voice thundering like a self-proclaimed king, Folake's eyes prying into every corner, and her mother's silence pressing on her heart. She knew that if she stayed any longer, the secret inside her bag would be uncovered. And so, with trembling hands but a resolute spirit, she slipped out before dawn, her school bag strapped tightly to her back, the coordinates glowing faintly in her memory, like a forbidden map. Her friend Say was waiting outside the gates, his beat-up Corolla coughing smoke into the air. Say had been her confidant since secondary school, a lanky boy with an ever-ready smile, though tonight his face was serious. "Ayomide," he whispered, glancing nervously at the security guards, "are you sure about this? If your brother finds out—" "He won't," Ayomide cut him off, though her voice wavered. "I need to know the truth, Say. My father left something for us." For me, they drove into the chaos of Lagos morning traffic. The city was already alive, hawkers knocking on windows selling gala and bottled water, Danfo buses screeching to stops as conductors shouted destinations in broken voices, Okada riders weaving dangerously between SUVs and trucks. Billboards loomed above them, some advertising politicians, others imported beauty creams, all of them reminders of the world Chief Alade had helped build and manipulate. Ayomide clutched her bag, her stomach tight, each honk of a horn echoing like her father's voice urging her forward. By midday they had reached Ibadan. The roads grew narrower, red dust coating everything from roadside corn sellers to the passing Kiki Napep riders. The air smelled of roasted plantain and petrol, a strange mix of hunger and survival. Following the coordinates, they found themselves before a rundown building, its paint peeling, windows clouded with dust. It looked nothing like the wealth Ayomide associated with her father, yet something about it felt deliberate. Inside, the silence was deafening. The office smelled of old paper and forgotten secrets. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight, breaking through cracked blinds. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers half open, their contents yellowed with time. Say whistled under his breath. "This doesn't look like a billionaire's office." "Are you sure we're in the right place?" Ayomide ignored him. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on a massive safe in the corner, its surface coated in years of neglect. She hesitated, then bent down to inspect it. The dial was stiff, unyielding, but beside it, on a desk buried under ledgers, she found a small brass key tucked inside a dusty envelope. Her hands shook as she tried it. It fit. The safe creaked open, revealing stacks of files, thick folders bound with fading strings, and ledgers filled with numbers that made Say whistle again, this time louder. Offshore accounts, shell companies, secret holdings in foreign lands, all under coded names, yet unmistakably tied to Chief Alade. It was the kind of evidence that could unravel Kunle's claim to the empire and reveal the scale of wealth even the newspapers hadn't guessed. At the bottom of the pile, wrapped in brown paper, was a sealed envelope. Across its surface, written in her father's familiar, bold handwriting, were the words, "To my true heir." Ayomide froze. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She touched the envelope as if it might burn her. The words stared back at her. Not just ink on paper, but destiny calling her name. She wanted to tear it open, to devour the truth inside, but her hands wouldn't move. It was too much, too heavy for a girl who still felt like the baby of the family. Say placed a hand on her shoulder. "Open it, Ayo. If your father trusted you enough to leave this, then maybe you're stronger than you think." Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. Instead of opening it immediately, she slipped the envelope into her backpack, along with the most incriminating documents. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Trust nothing, not even those closest to you." She would keep the truth hidden until the right moment. As they stepped out of the building, Ayomide noticed movement at the far end of the street. A man dressed in black, his cap pulled low, leaned against a motorbike, his gaze locked on them. Her heart lurched. She tugged at Say's arm. "We need to go." Now they quickened their pace, but the man followed. His footsteps were steady, his eyes never leaving them. By the time they reached the car, sweat coated Ayomide's palms. She shoved the backpack into the back seat as Say started the engine. But before they could drive off, the sound of shattering glass erupted behind them. She spun around. Smoke was rising from the building they had just left. Within seconds, flames licked at the old office walls, devouring the dusty ledgers and paper trails inside. The man in black smirked before disappearing into the crowd, as if his mission had been completed. Ayomide's chest heaved as she clutched the straps of her backpack. She had escaped with enough to expose the lies, but she also knew something chilling. Someone else was watching. Someone determined to erase every trace of her father's hidden truth. As the fire raged behind them, Ayomide stared at the sealed envelope in her lap, her pulse racing with fear and determination. The documents she carried could save her family, or destroy them forever. Sometimes betrayal tastes like pepper soup at the family table. The Adebayo dining room had always been a place of grandeur. Long mahogany table imported from Italy, crystal glasses that shimmered under the chandelier, and silverware polished to a fault. But tonight, beneath the soft golden lights, the atmosphere was heavy. The food laid before them, yam pottage steaming in ceramic bowls, fried fish glistening with palm oil, plates of pepper soup spiced to perfection, could not mask the tension choking the air. Every clink of a fork, every shift of a chair sounded like thunder. Kunle sat at the head of the table, the position their father once commanded. His agbada was pristine white, his gold wristwatch catching the light every time he lifted his glass. He wore the smile of a man pretending at peace, but his eyes darted sharply, calculating, hunting. Across from him, Folake stirred her food slowly, her gaze locked not on her plate, but on Ayomide, who sat nervously between them. "Ayomide," Kunle's voice was calm, almost gentle, the kind of calm that could lull the careless into a trap. "You've been so quiet these past days. How are you coping? I know Father's death has been hardest on you." "You were his baby." Ayomide's fork clattered against her plate. She forced a smile, nodding quickly. I'm fine, brother." Kunle leaned closer, his tone soft but edged. "You know you can tell me anything, right? Whatever you're hiding, I will protect you." Folake's spoon paused midair. Her eyes flickered. "Whatever you're hiding." She filed away the words in silence, her instincts sharpening. At the far end, Madame Mareniki dabbed at her lips with a napkin. She had barely touched her food, her grief still sitting in her stomach like stone. Yet as she watched her children's eyes dart across the table, She knew this was not ordinary sibling tension. Something darker lurked beneath the surface. Still, she chose silence, as she had always done, convincing herself that her children would find their way without her interference. Kunle set down his cutlery and exhaled loudly. "Let us stop pretending. We all know where this is going. Father's empire is too vast, too delicate to be left in the hands of—" His eyes cut briefly at Folake, then at Ayomide. "Those who lack vision. The company boards already recognize me as the natural heir. I will lead this family, whether anyone likes it or not." Folake's laugh was low, bitter, and sharp. "You think leadership is about force? About bullying servants and stealing car keys? Father did not build this empire on arrogance, Kunle. He built it on calculation. And if he left behind anything, I doubt he meant for you to ruin it with your greed." The air snapped like a wire stretched too tight. Kunle's jaw hardened, his nostrils flaring. "Careful, Folake. Do not mistake your education abroad for wisdom. You think because father entertained your questions once in a while, you understand him. You understood nothing. He trusted me. I was his firstborn, his shadow in business. The empire belongs to me." Folake's voice cut through the silence like glass shattering. "No, it belongs to the truth, and the truth is that father was not blind. He saw your greed. He saw how you disrespected mother, how you mistreated the staff. Do you really think he would hand everything to you without safeguards?" The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Ayomide's chest tightened as her siblings' voices rose. Her fork remained untouched, her yam pottage growing cold. She remembered their father's face in her childhood, his cold discipline, the way he punished even the smallest mistakes with thunderous lectures. He had raised them to be sharp, to never trust weakness, to never reveal too much. "Control your tongue, Ayomide," he had once told her when she was just 10. "Words can build or destroy an empire." Now, sitting between Kunle's pride and Folake's fury, she felt that lesson clawing at her. The envelope in her bag, the messages on the old Nokia. They burned inside her, begging for release. Her lips parted slightly as if the truth might slip out. But she bit down hard, tasting blood. Number. "Not yet." "Folake," Kunle sneered, breaking the tension. "You accuse me of bribery?" Bold words. "Do you have proof?" Folake's silence was her answer. Proof she did not yet have, but suspicion she carried like fire. Just then a servant entered quietly to refill glasses. He was young, barely out of his teens, his hands trembling as he poured water. Perhaps it was the pressure of the moment, or perhaps fate had loosened his tongue. But he muttered under his breath, "I saw her in Ibadan." The room froze. Forks stopped midair. Kunle's head snapped up. "What did you say?" The boy's eyes widened in horror. He stammered, I mean, I must have been mistaken, sir." But Kunle's gaze had already shifted, sharp and lethal, to Ayomide. His lips curled into a smile that was anything but warm. "Ibadan! Ayomide, what business did you have in Ibadan?" Ayomide's pulse thundered. She could feel Folake's eyes on her, too, burning with suspicion and dawning realization. Madame Morenike frowned deeply, confused and fearful. Ayomide swallowed hard, her throat dry. I went with a friend, just for schoolwork." Kunle's laughter was soft, mocking. "Schoolwork in Ibadan? Do not insult my intelligence, little sister. Father may have spoiled you, but I will not." The table fell into uneasy silence again, broken only by the faint hum of the generator outside. Dinner ended abruptly. The servants cleared plates in silence, while Ayomide excused herself, retreating to her room, her bag clutched tightly. She could barely breathe, her heart racing with the knowledge that the walls of secrecy were closing in. But Kunle was not done. That night, as the mansion grew quiet, Ayomide slipped into the garden for air, desperate to calm her pounding chest. She thought she was alone, but hidden in the shadows of the compound, Kunle stood, his eyes fixed on her. Kunle followed her silently, his footsteps masked by the night breeze, determined to uncover the secret she carried. The hunter had chosen his prey, and Ayomide's next move would decide whether she lived under truth or under Kunle's crushing grip. The walls of every mansion remember what the owners forget. For 20 years, Mama Chinyere had moved through the Adebayo mansion like a shadow, seen but never acknowledged, present but never truly heard. She had raised their children in small ways the parents never noticed, tying Ayomide's shoelaces before school, sneaking extra fried plantain onto Folake's plate when she sulked, humming Igbo lullabies while sweeping the corridor so the children would fall asleep faster. And yet, despite her quiet loyalty, she was treated as if her presence were nothing more than background noise. But Mama Chinyere had eyes, she had ears, and she had a memory sharper than steel. In the long nights when Chief Alade could not sleep, he would wander to the veranda or his private lounge, pour himself a glass of cognac, and pace like a restless lion. He believed himself alone, but Mama Chinyere, polishing silver in the shadows, often heard the fragments of his muttered confessions. She had listened, year after year, to a man tormented by the secrets he carried, and one day, driven by an instinct she could not explain, she had begun recording him with a small cassette recorder she kept hidden beneath her wrapper. Those tapes, old and dusty now, carried the unguarded voice of Chief Alade Adebayo, not the mogul in the newspapers, not the ruthless businessman, but the weary man who whispered to the night. It was Folake who first stumbled into Mama Chinyere's secret. After dinner one evening, when the house had quieted and Kunle had retreated to his self-appointed throne in the study, Folake found Mama Chinyere alone in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she folded napkins. "Mama, why are you shaking?" Folake asked softly, sensing more than fatigue. The maid looked at her, eyes glistening, then whispered, "Your father. He spoke more to the walls than to any of you." Folake frowned, her curiosity sparked. "What do you mean?" Mama Chinyere hesitated, then reached under her blouse and drew out a small, battered cassette recorder. She pressed it into Folake's palm. "Listen to this when no one is watching. But be careful, my daughter. Secrets are heavier than gold." Folake's heart pounded as she hid the recorder in her wrapper and hurried to her room. That night, in the dim glow of her bedside lamp, she pressed play. The tape crackled before a deep, weary voice filled the room. Her father's. "I built an empire of stone and steel, but it is my bloodline that will betray me. I see greed in Kunle's eyes. I see silence in Moriniki's heart. But there is another, a child who will surprise the world." Folake gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth. Her father's tone was one she had never heard, vulnerable, almost prophetic. A child who will surprise the world. Who did he mean? Ayomide or someone else? The next day, Kunle noticed something different in Folake's demeanor. She was quieter, watchful, almost as though she carried a new weapon. Suspicion clawed at him. It did not take long before the storm broke. That evening, as the family gathered in the sitting room, Kunle cornered Mama Chinyere. His voice was deceptively calm, but his eyes burned. "Mama Chinyere, I hear you've been whispering things to Folake. Old women and their stories. Tell me, what did you say?" The maid bowed her head, her hands trembling. "Nothing, sir. I only reminded her of your father's wisdom." But Kunle stepped closer, his frame towering over her. "Don't lie to me. I know when someone is feeding Folake with poison. If you value your life, you will stay silent." Fear tightened Mama Chinyere's chest, but courage flickered within her. For too long she had been treated as dirt, but now she carried the words of the chief himself. She raised her eyes slowly. "I was loyal to your father until his last breath. If you dishonor his truth, it will destroy you." Kunle's hand twitched as if he wanted to strike her, but he restrained himself. Instead, he hissed, "Be careful, old woman." Walls can collapse, and those inside them can be buried. That night, sensing her life was in danger, Mama Chinière fled. Wrapping her head tied tightly and clutching a small bag, she slipped out the servants' quarters under the cover of darkness. But Kunle had already set his thugs on her trail. 2 men followed her into the night, their footsteps pounding against the quiet streets. Meanwhile, in her room, Folake replayed the tape again and again, her mind spinning. A child who will surprise the world. Her father's words were clear, but their meaning was not. Who was this child? Why had her father chosen to confide it? Not in family, not in legal papers, but in the silent night and the ears of a maid. The tape ended with static, followed by her father's heavy sigh. She pressed rewind and listened again until finally she heard something she had missed the first time. A faint whisper at the very end. Her father's voice, low and deliberate. "My son, who is not Kunle." Folake's breath caught in her throat. The room spun around her. Her father had admitted it. There was another son. As Folake clutched the recorder, her hands trembling, she realized the battle for the empire had only just begun, and Kunle would kill to bury the truth. Every empire has a bloodline the world was never meant to see. The storm of secrets grew heavier with each passing day. Ayomide could no longer sleep without hearing her father's voice from the old Nokia, words echoing like thunder across her fragile heart. "My son, who is not Kunle." At first, she thought it must be a mistake, some drunken rambling of a dying man. But when she dug deeper into the phone, scrolling through its primitive folders, she found a text message tucked away like a hidden knife. It was short, sharp, and undeniable. Obinna. Enugu. Her heart pounded. A name. A place. The confirmation that their father had lived another life. A life the golden gates of the Adebayo mansion were never meant to reveal. Ayomide shared the discovery with Folake in hushed tones late at night. When Kunle's booming presence had retreated to his study, Folake's face paled as she heard the name. "So it's true. Father had another child." Her voice trembled, a mix of fury and sorrow. All his lectures on honor, on family discipline, and all along he was hiding this? Yet despite the sting of betrayal, Folake's sharp mind began to calculate. If Obinna is real, then the empire is not Kunle's alone. We must find him. We must hear the truth from his own lips. And so their secret journey began. They left Lagos in the early dawn, taking a bus instead of the family's convoy to avoid suspicion. The road stretched endlessly before them, crowded with hawkers selling roasted corn, sachet water, and groundnuts at every stop. The hot air smelled of sweat, petrol fumes, and dust, thick enough to choke. By the time they reached Enugu, the scenery had changed. Dusty village roads stretched into the horizon, where children in torn school uniforms chased each other barefoot. The markets bustled with traders shouting over each other, the aroma of nkwobi and roasted yam mixing in the air. But amidst the noise, poverty stared back at them. Rusted zinc roofs, cracked mud walls, and faces lined with hardship. Obinna lived here. They found him in a mechanic's workshop, his hands blackened with grease, his shirt faded from years of labor. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that carried the weight of survival. When Ayomide approached timidly, introducing herself, he looked at her with suspicion. "My sister? From where?" His voice was laced with disbelief. "Do you think because you wear fine lace and gold that you can come here and call me brother?" Folake stepped forward, her tone steady. "We are not here to mock you, Obinna. We are here because the truth cannot stay buried forever. Our father, Chief Alade Adebayo, he was also your father." Obinna laughed bitterly, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Do not insult me. I know who my father was, a poor man who died before I could walk. My mother raised me with her. Tears, not with gold. Leave this place before I chase you myself." But then from the shadows of the workshop, a frail woman emerged. Her wrapper was tied loosely, her steps weak, but her eyes filled with unspoken truth. It was Obinna's mother. Her lips trembled as she stared at Folake and Ayomide. You carry his face, she whispered, her voice breaking. Alade! Obinna turned sharply. Mama, what are you saying? Tears streamed down her cheeks as she clutched her chest. I kept it from you, Obinna. I wanted to protect you from that man's world. But yes, Chief Alade Adebayo was your father. He left me with nothing but shame and you with questions. But blood cannot be denied. The silence that followed was deafening. Obinna's hands trembled, the spanner he held clattering to the ground. He stared at his mother, then at the sisters standing before him. His world spun, the foundation of his identity crumbling beneath him. I am the son of a billionaire, he whispered, his voice hollow. Then why did I grow up eating Gary without sugar? Why did I sweat under sun and oil while you all dined under chandeliers? His voice rose, thick with anger and heartbreak. Where was this father when Mama cried herself to sleep? Where was he when I begged for school fees? Ayomide's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to reach for him, to hold him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. Leave me! I want no part of your empire. That man may have given me blood, but he never gave me life. Folake, though shaken, stood firm. You can deny the wealth, Obinna, but you cannot deny the truth. And whether you want it or not, Kunle will come for you. He knows his throne is threatened. Protect yourself. Indeed, even as they spoke, Kunle had already moved his pieces. Through a network of contacts, he had learned of Obinna's existence. To him, Obinna was not family. He was a threat, and threats were meant to be eliminated. Private investigators were dispatched to Enugu, their orders clear. Erase Obinna before his name reached the courts, before his presence dismantled Kunle's claim. The attack came swiftly. The next day, Obinna went to the local market to buy spare parts. The air was thick with the cries of traders. Buy your tomatoes here! Fresh fish! Fresh fish! When suddenly, chaos erupted. A motorbike roared through the crowd. Two men dressed in black, their faces hardened. One pulled out a pistol, aiming straight at Obinna. The first shot cracked through the air, sending traders screaming and scattering. Stalls overturned, tomatoes rolling across the ground, fish splattering into the dust. Obinna ducked instinctively, his heart racing as the bullet tore through the air above him. Ayomide, who had followed at a distance with Folake, screamed his name. Panic surged through her as she saw the assassins circle back. Obinna grabbed a wooden stool, hurling it at them as he sprinted through the chaos. People shoved and shouted, the market drowning in terror. The assassins gave chase, but Obinna darted between stalls, leaping over baskets of yams, his body fueled by pure survival. He could hear their footsteps pounding behind him, the metallic click of a gun being reloaded. His chest burned, his vision blurred, but something inside him refused to surrender. He ducked into a narrow alley, panting, his shirt soaked with sweat. The assassins slowed, scanning the maze of paths, their curses filling the air. Obinna pressed himself against a wall, his hands trembling, his heart thundering. As he gasped for breath, Obinna realized his life had changed forever. The empire he never asked for had already painted a target on his back, and his only choice now was to fight or be erased. The dead man's empire becomes a battlefield of the living. The boardroom of Adebayo Holdings was a palace of power. High-backed leather chairs surrounded a gleaming mahogany table, while glass windows overlooked the sprawl of Victoria Island. The air was cool from central air conditioning, but tension heated the room as Kunle stood at the head, dressed in a navy blue agbada that screamed authority. His baritone voice boomed, as though his father's seat belonged to him by divine right. Gentlemen, Kunle began, his hands spread wide, and ladies, he nodded briefly to the two female directors. We are at a critical time. My father is gone, but the empire he built must not be weakened. I, as his eldest son, am ready to take the reins. We will restructure the company, expand our real estate arm, and move more aggressively into politics. Some shareholders nodded cautiously, but others exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Adeyemi, a balding man with sharp glasses, cleared his throat. Kunle, forgive me, but the will we saw only names you as executor of family properties, not as sole head of this company. We cannot just hand you absolute control. Kunle's jaw tightened. Do you question my father's judgment? He raised me for this role. Who else among his children has the strength to lead? Another director, Madame Bello, leaned forward, her guile towering like a crown. Strength is not the only qualification, Kunle. The market watches us closely. Investors want stability, not dictatorship. The room stirred. For the first time since his father's death, Kunle felt his control slipping. His eyes darted across the table, measuring loyalty. And then, like a storm breaking the horizon, the glass doors swung open. Folake stepped inside. She wore a dark suit that sharpened her presence, her heels clicking like warning shots against the tiled floor. In her hand was a small recorder. Ladies and gentlemen, she said calmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs, before you allow my brother to crown himself king, you should hear my father's own words. Kunle's eyes widened in rage. Folake, get out! You have no authority here. But the board leaned forward, curiosity ignited. Folake pressed play, and the boardroom filled with the crackling voice of Chief Alade. I fear for the empire I leave behind. Greed must not guide it. If Kunle takes everything unchecked, he will destroy what I built. Gasps rippled through the room. Kunle lunged forward, slamming his palm against the table. This is nonsense! Fabrications by a maid. Not fabrications, Folake countered sharply. Recordings. Our father's voice. Proof that the empire belongs not to greed, but to truth. If you give Kunle full control, you are handing over your futures to a man my father himself did not trust. The room exploded with whispers. Some nodded in agreement, others shook their heads, torn between loyalty and fear. One elderly director rose to his feet, his voice shaking but firm. Kunle, this company is not your inheritance. It is Nigeria's. Your father built it from the sweat of thousands, not just for one man to rule like a tyrant. The words cut like a blade. Kunle's face darkened, his fists clenched. He glared at Folake, his eyes promising vengeance. Without another word, he grabbed his folder and stormed out, the door slamming behind him so hard the glass rattled. Silence lingered after his exit. Folake stood tall, her face calm though her heart raced. She had won a momentary victory, but she knew Kunle's pride would not allow such humiliation to go unanswered. True enough, later that evening Kunle sat in his father's study, the curtains drawn, his face half lit by the glow of a desk lamp. He scribbled furiously across papers, muttering under his breath. If the board doubted him, he would rewrite the story. He would alter documents, manipulate signatures, bribe registries. The empire would be his, even if he had to bend reality to his will. As he plotted, a storm raged outside, lightning cutting across the sky. It was as if the heavens themselves bore witness to the battle tearing the Adebayo dynasty apart. Meanwhile, Folake sat in her room, staring at the recorder on her desk, replaying her father's words over and over. Each crackle of his voice was both a weapon and a burden. She knew Kunle would not stop. He was already sharpening his claws. A knock startled her. She turned quickly, expecting perhaps Ayomide, or worse, Kunle. But when she opened the door, a man in a dark suit stood there, holding a sealed brown envelope. Madame Folake? He asked softly. Yes? He handed her the envelope, his expression unreadable. From the office of Barrister Okiki. Strictly confidential, she shut the door quickly, her hands trembling as she tore the seal. Inside, she found a set of crisp papers. At the top, stamped with legal insignia, were the words, DNA test results, Obinna Adebayo, Her eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. The truth her father had whispered into shadows was now written in black and white. As Folake clutched the papers, her heart pounded. Obinna was no longer a rumor, no longer a secret whispered on cassette tapes. He was real, and the proof of his blood was now in her hands. Blood is louder than any forged document. Folake sat frozen in her room, the weight of the envelope pressing down on her chest. The storm outside had not subsided, thunder rolling across Lagos like drums of war. She unfolded the crisp sheets with trembling hands, her eyes scanning line after line of medical jargon until they locked on the conclusion stamped in bold. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. Obinna Adebayo is the biological son of Chief Alade Adebayo. Her heart thundered louder than the storm. It was no longer whispers, no longer suspicions, no longer cryptic recordings on a dusty phone. It was fact, cold, clinical, undeniable fact. Their father had left behind another son, one who carried his blood as surely as Kunle, Folake, and Ayomide did. The door creaked open, and Ayomide slipped in quietly, her eyes darting to the envelope in Folake's hands. "Is that?" she whispered, unable to finish the sentence. Folake's voice broke as she nodded. "It's true, Ayo. Obinna is our brother." Ayomide's breath hitched. Relief, fear, and guilt tangled inside her. She had held on to her father's secrets longer than she should have, and now the truth was burning its way into the open. "We have to protect him," Ayomide whispered urgently. "Kunle will kill him if he finds out." But Kunle was already suspicious. The boardroom humiliation still stung like acid on his pride. He had stormed through the mansion earlier, shouting at the staff, tearing papers from drawers, demanding loyalty. "This house will not betray me," he roared, his voice echoing through the marble halls. Madame Morenike had retreated to her room, her sobs muffled by closed doors, and in the privacy of his study, Kunle plotted his counterattack. If Folake brought evidence, he would bring his own, manufactured, if necessary. That very night, he contacted a corrupt laboratory technician he had used before for shady business. "Run a DNA test," Kunle ordered coldly, sliding thick envelopes of naira across the table. "And the result must say that boy is not related to us." "Do you understand me?" The technician nodded nervously, knowing refusal could mean death. The next morning, Lagos carried on with its noisy rhythm, traffic jams, impatient horns, street hawkers chanting. But inside the Adebayo mansion, tension coiled like a python. Folake summoned her siblings to her room, locking the door. She laid the DNA results on the table. Madame Morenike sat silently in the corner, her face pale, her hands twisting her wrapper. When her eyes landed on the papers, tears streamed down her cheeks. "I knew," she whispered brokenly. "I knew about him. I saw the way your father's eyes changed when the name Obinna was mentioned. I kept silent because I was ashamed. I could not bear the world knowing my husband had another child." Folake's chest tightened. Her mother's silence was not betrayal, but pain, a wound she had carried for years. Kunle burst into the room without knocking, his voice thunderous. "Enough of this charade!" He snatched the papers from the table, scanning them quickly. His eyes flared with fury. "Fabrications! Lies to weaken me!" "This is from Barrister Okiki's office," Folake shot back, her voice firm. "It is not a lie, Kunle. Obinna is our brother, and he has as much claim to this empire as you do." Kunle's laughter was dark, echoing through the room. "You really think a mechanic boy from Enugu will take my empire?" "Never. I will bury him before that happens." Ayomide flinched, her voice trembling. "You can't harm him, Kunle." "He's blood." "Blood?" Kunle sneered. "Blood is nothing without power." The confrontation was interrupted by a frantic knock. A servant rushed in, panic etched on his face. "Sir, madam, Obinna has been attacked." "He is in the hospital, in Enugu." Ayomide gasped, her knees nearly giving way. Folake's eyes widened in horror. Madame Morenike wailed softly into her hands. Kunle's lips curled into a smirk he tried to hide. They left for Enugu immediately. The journey was long and heavy with silence, each sibling lost in thought. When they arrived at the modest hospital, the smell of disinfectant and faint cries of patients filled the air. Obinna lay on a narrow bed, bandages wrapped around his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. His face was pale, his breaths shallow, but his eyes opened slowly when he heard Ayomide's voice. "You came," he whispered weakly. Ayomide grasped his hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We're here, Obinna. We're not leaving you again." Folake stood on the other side, her eyes soft but firm. "You are our brother, and you are part of this family, whether Kunle accepts it or not." Obinna shook his head weakly. "I don't want your empire. I just want peace. This wealth you fight over, it has only brought me bullets." Folake's throat tightened. "Maybe you don't want the empire, Obinna. But the empire wants you, and unless we fight, Kunle will erase you." Obinna closed his eyes, silent tears slipping down his temples. The truth was a prison he had never asked to enter. Later that night, as rain drummed softly against the hospital windows, Obinna stirred suddenly, his face twisted in pain. His voice was hoarse, barely audible, but the words struck like thunder. "I saw him," Obinna whispered, "the man who shot me. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone from the family." Ayomide froze, her heart seizing. Folake leaned closer, her blood running cold. Madame Morenike gasped audibly, clutching her chest. Obinna's eyes flickered with fear as he whispered, "It was Kunle." And with that, the room descended into a silence heavier than death itself. Sometimes a mother's silence is heavier than a father's sins. The hospital room hung in suffocating silence after Obinna's whisper. His weak voice had named the unthinkable, and yet everyone knew in their bones it was possible. Kunle, the firstborn, the self-proclaimed heir, the one who had sworn no one else would sit on their father's throne. Ayomide's sobs broke the silence first, her tears spilling freely. "Kunle tried to kill you. His own brother." Folake clenched her fists so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Rage flickered across her face, but beneath it was a deep ache. She wanted to scream, to storm out, to confront Kunle immediately, yet she forced herself to remain calm. They needed strategy, not chaos. Madame Morenike, however, crumbled. She slumped into a chair, her wrapper loosening as she pressed trembling hands to her face. A heavy sob escaped her lips, the kind of sound that carried years of swallowed grief. "My children," she said through broken breaths, "I have kept too many truths buried. And now the graves are breaking open." Ayomide looked at her mother with wide, tearful eyes. "What do you mean, Mama?" Morenike's voice shook as she spoke, her gaze far away. "I knew about Obinna from the beginning. Long before any of you were born, your father betrayed me. He met a woman in Enugu during his business travels. I found out when the whispers reached me. Whispers that refused to die, even when I confronted him. He admitted it once, in anger when I threatened to leave. He told me she had borne him a son." The room seemed to tilt, the weight of her confession pressing down on her children. "You knew?" Folake's voice was sharp, edged with hurt. "All these years, you knew we had a brother, and you said nothing?" Morenike's tears fell freely now. "What would you have had me do, Folake?" "Announce to the world that my husband, the mighty Chief Alade, had shamed me. That his empire was built not only on wealth, but on infidelity? I could not. I swallowed the pain. I kept quiet. For you, for this family's image, I thought if I buried the truth, it would never rise." Obinna shifted weakly on the bed, his eyes glassy. "So you let me grow up in poverty while you lived in mansions." His voice cracked with anguish. "You knew I existed, and you left me there." Morenike clasped her hands together, rocking slightly. I visited once, she whispered, when you were still a baby. I wanted to see you, to touch the child that carried my husband's blood. But your mother chased me out. She cursed me, told me I would never take you away. I returned to Lagos that night, and I never went back. I told myself it was not my fight, that your father would eventually bring you into the fold. But he never did. He chose cowardice, and I chose silence. The words hung heavy in the sterile hospital air. Ayomide buried her face in her palms, her chest heaving. Folake closed her eyes, tears streaking down her cheeks, but her jaw set, in steel. And Obinna, pale and fragile, turned his face away, his breath uneven. You all speak of empire, he murmured bitterly. But to me, this empire has only been chains. A father who hid me, siblings who never knew me, a mother who kept silent, and now a brother who wants me dead. Ayomide rushed to his side, grabbing his hand. No, Obinna. We are here now. We will not let Kunle erase you. Father's secrets may have been born in shame, but the truth can still save us. Folake stepped closer, her voice firmer than ever. Obinna, listen to me. This fight is not just about wealth, it's about legacy. If Kunle takes control, he will destroy everything. Father knew it. That's why he left messages, recordings, evidence. He wanted the truth to guide the empire, and you are part of that truth. Morenike sobbed softly, shaking her head. I'm a coward. My silence allowed Kunle to grow into this monster. I should have spoken long ago, but it is not too late. There is more you must know. Ayomide looked at her mother, hope flickering. More? Morenike hesitated, her voice lowering. Your father wrote another will? A second one. Not the one Tunde read, not the one Kunle clings to. He told me about it one night, when his health was failing. He said the real will was hidden, locked in a device he trusted more than any lawyer. An old mobile phone, Ayomide's eyes widened. Her heart nearly stopped. She thought of the dust-covered Nokia 3310 still hidden in her bag. Yes, Morenike whispered, as if reading her thoughts. That phone. He told me the truth was in there. I never saw it, but I knew he kept it close. If you have it, then you hold the key to everything. Folake turned sharply to Ayomide, suspicion hardening into certainty. You have the phone, don't you? That's what you've been hiding all this time. Ayomide froze, her mouth opening and closing without words. The room erupted, Folake's demand hanging in the air, Morenike weeping into her wrapper, Obinna groaning in pain, and Ayomide clutching her bag, as if it contained her very soul. The secret she had guarded so desperately was about to shatter in the open. Sometimes the future of an empire lies inside a dying battery. Ayomide sat rigid in her chair, her bag clutched tightly against her chest. The hospital room seemed to shrink, the air thickening as Folake's eyes bore into her like daggers. Obinna's weak breathing filled the silence. Madame Morenike's sobs trembled in the background, and the storm outside drummed harder against the windows. Give it to me, Folake said at last, her voice sharp but steady. The phone. The one father used. Ayomide shook her head instinctively, tears rising to her eyes. No, you don't understand. If Kunle finds out, if anyone else sees... Enough hiding, Folake snapped, her composure cracking. Do you not see the blood already spilled? Do you not see Obinna lying here, half dead, because Kunle will stop at nothing? If that phone contains father's will, then keeping it hidden is no longer protection. It is destruction. Morenike's voice broke in, fragile yet pleading. Ayo, my baby, listen to your sister. That phone carries the truth your father left behind. Please. Before Kunle buries us all, let the truth speak. Ayomide's fingers trembled as she reached into her bag. The old Nokia 3310 emerged, its once blue shell now gray with age, its screen scratched but intact. She set it on the table carefully, as though it were an artifact unearthed from the grave. The siblings and their mother leaned in, breathless. Ayomide connected the charger she always carried with it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the faint glow returned, and the familiar tone rang weakly. Obinna stared at it in disbelief. This small thing holds the power to destroy Kunle? Folake exhaled. Or to destroy us all. Navigating the phone was slow, the buttons stiff from years of neglect. Ayomide scrolled through the menus until she reached the notes folder. Her heart raced as she clicked. Several files appeared, most filled with cryptic lines, but one stood out, titled The Will. She pressed it. The screen blinked, and then words began to scroll across the tiny screen, line after line, typed by the chief himself. I, Chief Alade Adebayo, write this in my own hand, for I trust no lawyer, no court, no relative to guard the truth. To my children, Kunle, Folake, Ayomide, and to Obinna, my blood from Enugu, I leave my empire not to one, but to all. You must govern it together, or it will destroy you. The firstborn shall not rule alone. The son I hid, Obinna, shall stand as equal. My empire must be a bond, not a sword. If you betray this, the curse of greed will finish what enemies could not. The room fell silent. The words carried weight beyond paper or ink. It was their father's voice, reaching from the grave with the authority that had once silenced nations. Folake's lips trembled. He named you, Obinna. He wrote it with his own hands. This is the truth he hid from Kunle. Obinna shook his head slowly, disbelief clouding his eyes. Equal? After all his lies? After leaving me in the dirt while you lived in mansions? He wants me to share an empire I never knew? Ayomide's voice broke. Yes, because he knew Kunle would destroy it if left alone. He wanted us united, not divided, but before they could absorb the weight of it, the door burst open. Kunle stormed in, his eyes wild, his frame looming like a predator. He had overheard enough to know the truth was slipping from his grasp. "What are you doing?" he roared, his gaze landing on the phone. In 2 strides, he reached the table, snatching it up. With a furious cry, he slammed it to the ground, stomping on it until the fragile screen cracked, sparks sputtering before it went dark forever. "No more lies!" Kunle shouted, his chest heaving. "No more tricks! I am the heir, and I will not let some old toy decide otherwise." Ayomide screamed, rushing forward, but Folake held her back. The phone lay shattered on the floor, its glow extinguished. For a moment, despair washed over them like a tidal wave. Years of secrets reduced to silence in an instant, but Folake's eyes glistened with defiance. Slowly, she reached into her purse and drew out a flash drive. Kunle froze, his face contorting with rage. "You really think I would trust one device?" Folake said coldly. "I recorded the will the moment Ayomide showed me." "Father's words are saved, Kunle. Even if you burn this hospital, the truth will outlive you." Kunle's roar filled the room, his fury uncontainable. He reached for her, his hand raised, and then a gunshot split the air. The sound was deafening in the cramped hospital room. Everyone froze. Ayomide screamed, clutching Obinna's hand. Folake staggered back, her recorder clattering to the floor. Madame Morenike collapsed to her knees, wailing. The smoke still lingered in the air as the siblings turned toward the door. Someone had fired, and the battle for the empire had just erupted into bloodshed. When greed pulls the trigger, innocence bleeds. The gunshot still echoed in the hospital corridors. Long after the smoke had cleared, nurses screamed and ducked for cover, patients wailed in confusion, and the faint smell of gunpowder lingered in the air like a curse. Folake pressed her palm against her chest, gasping in disbelief. The bullet had missed her by inches, striking the wall behind her, sending fragments of plaster across the floor. Her recorder lay where it had fallen, still intact. Ayomide's voice cracked into the chaos. "Who fired?" The door creaked, and one of Kunle's hired thugs appeared, gun raised, eyes cold. Orders are orders, he muttered, stepping further inside. But before he could fire again, Obinna, weak as he was, forced himself upright on the bed. His body trembled with pain, but his voice carried the weight of defiance. "Shoot me if you must," Obinna rasped, his eyes fixed on the thug. "But you cannot kill the truth." "My father's blood runs in me, whether Kunle admits it or not." For a moment the thug hesitated. Something about Obinna's words pierced through his loyalty. His grip faltered just long enough for hospital security to rush in. Shouts erupted, the gun was wrestled away, and the thug was dragged out kicking and cursing. Kunle, standing frozen in the corner, his chest heaving, realized his plan had collapsed before his very eyes. His fury spilled over. "You think this ends me?" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "I am the firstborn. I am the Empire. None of you, none, can take what is mine." Folake's voice cut through like a blade. "It was never yours, Kunle. It was father's, and he left it for all of us, not for your greed alone." The doors burst open again, this time not with thugs, but with uniformed police officers, their boots heavy against the tiled floor. The lead officer, stern-faced and resolute, stepped forward. "Kunle Adebayo, you are under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy." Kunle's face twisted in disbelief. "You dare arrest me? Do you know who I am?" The officer's gaze was unflinching. "We know who you are, and we also know what you've done. Evidence has been submitted to us. Recordings, testimonies, documents. The law has caught up with you." Folake bent slowly, picked up the recorder, and pressed play. Chief Alade's weary voice filled the room once more. "If Kunle takes everything unchecked, he will destroy what I built. My empire must belong to all my children, including Obinna." The words fell like judgment from beyond the grave. The officers tightened their grip on Kunle as he roared in protest, thrashing violently. But the fight was gone from him. The empire he had claimed as his birthright now slipped from his hands like sand. Madame Moreniki collapsed into tears, whispering prayers of forgiveness for the families she had watched unravel. Ayomide held her tightly, weeping too, while Folake turned to Obinna. "Brother," she said softly for the first time without hesitation, "the empire belongs to us, all of us. But most of all, it belongs to the truth." Obinna's eyes glistened. He had never wanted this empire, never sought the riches or the power. But in that moment, as he looked at his sisters and at the mother who had once hidden his existence, he realized that perhaps the empire was not just about wealth. It was about family, the broken, bleeding, but undeniable bond that tied them together. Days later, the family mansion in Ikoyi looked different. The golden gates still stood tall, the marble floors still gleamed, but the silence inside carried something new. Not greed, not suspicion, but reconciliation. Kunle's absence was felt like a shadow, his name whispered only in hushed tones as his case moved swiftly through the courts. The empire he tried to steal now stood in the hands of the siblings he had sought to destroy. The boardroom of Adebayo Holdings met again, but this time it was not Kunle's voice that thundered. Folake spoke with the sharpness of intellect. Ayomide added her youthful insight, and Obinna, still healing but resolute, offered the grounded wisdom of a man who had known hardship. Together they stunned the shareholders, not with arrogance but with unity. And when Madame Moreniki walked into the meeting, her head held high for the first time since her husband's death, the room fell silent in respect. She spoke briefly, her voice steady. "My husband left behind an empire of wealth, but also of wounds. Today my children choose not just to inherit his riches, but to heal his mistakes. That is the true legacy of Chief Alade Adebayo." That evening, as the sun dipped over Lagos, the family gathered in the mansion's courtyard. The smell of jollof rice and grilled fish filled the air, the soft hum of a generator blending with the distant sounds of the city. For once they ate together without knives hidden behind smiles. Ayomide looked at Obinna across the table, her voice quiet but firm. Do you forgive us? For not knowing you, for not searching sooner? Obinna smiled faintly, his scars still fresh, but his heart lighter. There is nothing to forgive. We are family, and family. We find each other, even in the darkest shadows. Folake reached out, placing her hand over his. Then let us promise, never again will greed divide us. Father's mistakes will not be ours. They bowed their heads together, sealing a silent pact. The empire was reborn, not in marble halls or foreign bank accounts, but in the fragile but unbreakable bond of siblings who had fought through betrayal, bullets, and blood to find one another. One old mobile phone, forgotten in dust, had whispered a truth strong enough to break chains of greed and rebuild an empire on the foundation of family. Family, this story may have ended, but the lessons of power, betrayal, and truth live on. If you were gripped by every twist, make sure you subscribe, like, and share, because even bigger revelations are coming.